In this video, we'll learn how monetary policy works, how the actions of the Federal Reserve can have a powerful effect on the economy. We'll start by looking at the demand for money from households and firms, and then we'll see how the Fed's ability to change the supply of money allows it to move the interest rates in the short run. Our video begins again with Tammy Miller. Isn't she beautiful? Upon receiving Todd's paycheck, Tammy has to make an important decision. Most economic decisions involve trade-offs. Individuals decide how much of a good or service to consume by determining the overall benefit. The same decision process is used when deciding how much money to hold. Let's start by taking a closer look at the demand for money curve. Individuals find it useful to hold some of their money because of the convenience it provides. Money is used to make purchases directly. The price of holding money is the interest rate given up. Let's look at an example from a day in the life of Tammy. Every payday, Tammy must decide how much money to keep as cash or how much money to put in an asset account that pays interest. If the bank's interest rate is low, the opportunity cost of holding money is small. Tammy will not choose to invest Todd's money in a bank for a low interest rate. For example, if the interest rate is 1%, Tammy will buy more purses because 1% is not a high enough rate. If the interest rate to invest Todd's money in the bank was 7% instead of 1%, the opportunity cost for holding money would be greater because Tammy would be giving up earning a 7% return on Todd's money. What will Tammy do? I know what Todd would do. Maybe I should not use Tammy as an example, because Tammy is not always a rational individual. She would forgo the higher interest rate of 7% for a new purse. Most rational individuals would choose to put their money in an asset-type account for a high interest rate of 7% because the opportunity cost to hold money is much too high. Don't worry, I still love Tammy. Now that we understand why the demand curve is downward sloping, people will hold more money at lower interest rates and less money at higher interest rates, let's examine the three situations that could cause Tammy's demand for money to increase. Notice, when the demand for money increases, the curve shifts to the right, causing the interest rate to increase. Reason number one for holding more money is income. When Todd makes more money, Tammy will demand more products because she can afford them. She might buy another purse, some shoes, or even a Nintendo for the boys. Even with Todd's raise, Tammy will not buy anything for Todd. Poor Todd. That's why Todd will have to steal money, his money, from Tammy's purse. Another factor that could cause an increase in Tammy's demand for money is price level. If the price level increases, Tammy will need more money to buy necessities like food for the family and her purse. Still, nothing for Todd. The last factor that could cause Tammy to demand more money is an increase in GDP, or the production of a lot of stuff. Notice Tammy will buy more shoes, clothes, purses, and video games for the kids, but still nothing for Todd. Todd must make a great deal of money. Let's look at what happens when the demand for money decreases. A decrease in the demand for money is a leftward shift and will cause interest rates to decrease. Remember, interest rates are the cost of money. And if people demand less money, the cost of money decreases. The first factor that could cause a decrease in the demand for money is a decrease in income. Let's assume that Todd quits yearbook. Tammy's income, or Todd's income, would go down. Tammy would have less money to spend. Oh, what will Tammy do? She will only be able to buy one purse. A second factor that could cause the demand for money to decrease is a decrease in the overall price level. Now, Tammy will be able to buy her purse, shoes, and Nintendo for the boys, but with less money. She will take the remaining money and put it into the bank to earn interest. Still nothing for Todd. A third factor that could cause the demand for money to decrease is a decrease in the overall production of goods. With less goods to buy, Tammy will be able to put more money into the bank to earn interest. In review, when the demand for money goes up, the interest rate goes up. There are 3 reasons that cause the demand for money to increase. Number 1, you have more money. Therefore, you want to spend more. Therefore, you need more cash. Number 2, the price. In order to buy the same goods you did before, you're going to have to hold more of your money in cash. And 3, the more produced, the more you'll want to buy, the more cash you will need. A decrease in the demand for money will decrease the interest rate, and this will happen for one of 3 reasons. Income goes down. Now you can't afford as much, so you don't demand as much cash on hand. 2, the price of the goods go down. Now you don't need as much cash to buy those goods that you always bought. And 3 would be GDP, or production, goes down. You don't need as much money because there aren't as many goods to buy. That the supply of money curve is vertical. It is vertical because it is independent of interest rate. It is vertical because the Fed controls how much is in the money supply at any given time. If the Fed feels we are headed for a recession, they will increase the money supply, which will lower the interest rates and encourage spending. If the Fed feels we are headed for a time of inflation, the Fed will decrease the money supply, thereby increasing the interest rate and slowing down the borrowing and spending of money. Let's assume the economy is in a recession. In a recession, the Federal Reserve wants to increase the money supply. By increasing the money supply, people will spend more money, banks will give more loans, and firms will invest more. By increasing the money supply, the interest rates will decrease. In the graph above, you can see by increasing the supply of money, the interest rate would go from 4% to 2%. More consumers and more firms are likely to borrow and spend at 2% rather than 4%. The first way the Fed can increase the money supply is by changing the reserve requirement. Remember, the reserve requirement is the amount of money that banks are required to keep in their reserves. With a 10% reserve requirement, $10 of a $100 deposit will have to be kept in reserves. This means that $90 can be loaned out. Now remember, to increase the money supply, we need to get more money in the economy. So if they decrease the reserve requirement to 5%, the bank is only required to keep $5 in reserve and thereby loan out $95. A second way of increasing the money supply is to lower the discount rate. The discount rate is the interest rate between the Fed and a bank. If a bank needs to borrow money, they can borrow from the Fed. If the interest rate is 10%, banks are less likely to borrow money. So if the goal of the Fed is to increase the money supply and they decrease the discount rate, then banks are more likely to borrow money and make loans. The most common way for the Federal Reserve to increase the money supply is by buying bonds. Buy bonds, big bucks. Let's pretend I'm the Fed and you're the bank. You right now have a bond that's worth $1,000. If I, the Fed, was to buy that bond, you would no longer have the bond, you would have $1,000. And then you could begin loaning that $1,000 out. So by the Fed buying bonds, they increase the money supply. Remember, buy bonds, big bucks. Increasing the money supply decreases the interest rate, and this will cause consumers and investors to spend more. Now let's assume that instead of a recession, the United States is in a time of inflation. Inflation means there's too much money, too much spending, and this too much money and too much spending is driving up the cost of goods. In this case, the Federal Reserve would want to take money out of the economy, so they want to contract the economy or decrease the amount of money in the system. By decreasing the amount of money in the system, this will increase interest rates and cause consumption and investment to both decrease. The first way the Federal Reserve would decrease the supply of money is by changing the reserve requirement. By going from 5% to 10%, which would be an increase in reserve requirement, the bank would be forced to hold $10 instead of $5, and the bank could only make $90 worth of loans as compared to $95 of loans. The second action the Fed can take to contract the money supply would be to increase the discount rate. Remember, the discount rate is the rate at which the banks borrow from the Fed. The lower this rate, 5%, the more likely banks are to borrow money. By raising the discount rate to 10%, banks are now discouraged from borrowing money from the Fed. The third action the Fed can take is the most popular action, the action that is done every day in the Bank of New York, and this is the selling of bonds. Sell bonds, small bucks. If I'm the Federal Reserve, I offer a bank a bond. In exchange for that bond, the bank gives me cash. By giving me cash, the Federal Reserve is removing that cash from the economy. Therefore, the bank no longer has that cash and can no longer use that to make loans. In review, in a time of a recession, the Fed wants to increase the money supply. By increasing the money supply, the interest rate goes from 4% to 2%. With a lower interest rate, businesses will invest more and consumers will buy more. They can increase the money supply in three ways. Number one, they can decrease the reserve requirement. By decreasing the reserve requirement, they are telling the banks that they have to keep less money in reserves, thereby allowing banks to make more loans. Number two, they can decrease the discount rate. By decreasing the discount rate, banks find it more affordable to borrow money from the Fed and then can make more loans. The third and most popular means to increasing the money supply is the buying of bonds. The Fed takes the bond from the bank and gives them cash. These are what we call expansionary tools. In a time of inflation, the Fed wants to pull money out of the system. By decreasing the money supply, the interest rate will increase, and businesses and consumers will spend less. There are three tools the Fed can use. Number one, they can increase the reserve requirement, thereby forcing banks to keep more money in reserves and not allowing them to make as many loans. Two, they can increase the discount rate. By increasing the discount rate, the banks will be more likely not to borrow money from the Fed, thereby not making as many loans. The third and most popular means to decreasing the money supply is the selling of bonds. The Fed gives the bonds to the bank, and the bank gives money to the Fed. Thereby, the Fed is pulling money out of the system. This is what we call contractionary policy. So what can we learn from this video? Number one, I think it's safe to say we can learn that Todd loves Tammy more than Tammy loves Todd. If Todd wants golf clubs, Todd's going to have to steal his money from Tammy's purse. The second thing we can learn from this video is that Todd did not say "I do" at his wedding. He said "yes, dear." And it is this reason why his marriage is so successful. We can also learn that most economic decisions involve trade-off. Individuals decide how much goods or services to consume on a daily basis. The same decision process is used to decide how much money they wish to hold versus how much money they wish to put in an account to gain interest. If people demand more money, the demand curve will shift to the right, thus increasing the interest rate. Remember, interest rate is the cost of money. If people demand more of anything, the cost is going to go up. So when people demand to hold more money, this will drive the interest rate up. When people decide to demand less money, the demand will go down, thus the cost of money, i.e. the interest rate, will go down. The last thing I hope you learn from this video is the Fed, just like Tammy, controls the money supply. By increasing the money supply, they are decreasing the interest rate and encouraging spending. By decreasing the supply of money, they are increasing the interest rate and discouraging spending.